In 600 Common Era, there were four African Christian kingdoms located in northeastern Africa: Ethiopia, which recently formed from Aksum, and the Nubian kingdoms, including Nobatia, Makara, and Alwa. Unfortunately for Nobatia, they were annexed to Makara in the early 600s and therefore does not appear again in this film. Not directly from this time period, but worthy of mention, is the Ethiopian king Ezana. Ezana converted Ethiopia to Christianity in 347 mainly to improve trade with the Christian empires, such as Byzantium. Trade was very important to the Christian kingdoms, who gained their riches through trade of items such as slaves, gold, dates, large animals, ivory, and ebony, in return for luxury items from Europe and Asia. Most of this trade actually occurred along the Red Sea, although the Mediterranean was not entirely excluded.
Although active in trade, much of the population of these kingdoms did not utilize a currency, preferring instead to barter for goods, although Egyptian currency was valuable to some traders in Makara since Egypt was their main trade partner. The barter system was particularly prevalent among the peasants of the time. The bulk of the population worked in agriculture, making up the lowest class. These low-class peasants and slaves were mainly subsistence farmers, growing mostly wheat, barley, and dates. Slightly above the peasants and slaves were the skilled craftsmen. These workers provided many of the materials for trade. Blacksmiths in these countries maintained the skill of ironworking, providing the military with iron weapons. On top of the craftsmen were merchants. They were some of the richest and most learned of the population, having traveled the world and received an education. On top of the population pyramid were the priests and rulers.
As the name implies, the kingdoms were monarchies, but in Makara the crown passed to the sister's son instead of the ruler's son. The social pyramid was typical. The role of women was not. Women were subordinate, as usual, but they did not have the extreme laws governing their behaviors. This slightly more respect arose for many reasons, including Egyptian influence, their contribution to the function of a household through the building and selling of household items, and the periodic managing of the household when males were away. Families were not small groups. Arid farmland was hard to work, and more children meant more labor.
Now, as we mentioned, trade is what led to the prosperity of the nation. Around 640, a new competitor beat them out of maritime trade, the Islamic Arabian merchants. These merchants steadily consolidated their control of the trade, while at the same time armies conquered the continent of Africa. With the fall of Egypt to the Muslim armies, Nubia became isolated from their main benefactor and supporter, Byzantium. This meant they were at the mercy of the Muslim armies. This worked against them for around 650. A large Muslim force invaded under the command of Abd Allah ibn Sa'd ibn Ab, who sacked the capital and destroyed the church there. The resulting treaty, the Treaty of Bakht, governed trade and maintained a tense peace for 600 years. As hostility escalated, the skilled archers and horsemen were barely able to hold off raids and invasions, leading to the eventual collapse of Makara, brought on by the sea of illegal Islamic immigrants in the 1300s. Ethiopia, being farther south away from the large Islamic state, survived for much longer. They too were eventually invaded, but were able to fight off the Islamic forces with the aid of fellow Portuguese Christians. Ethiopia did not suffer as much from Arabic control of trade, and as a result were able to use its great wealth to construct great works such as the 11 stone churches that were carved from a single slab of rock. These great works were accredited to Lilibela, the king at the time.
Most of the art was religious, and frescoes of saints can be found in the churches of the time. Among other things, wheel-made pottery was produced by skilled craftsmen. Much of what we learn about these kingdoms comes from their art and written language. If you haven't noticed, Makara and Ethiopia have been practically the only two kingdoms discussed. Alwa was rumored to be large and powerful, but lacked a written language, and thus is a prime example of an advanced African civilization that was mostly forgotten due to having no written records.
The most distinguishing trait of the African Christian kingdoms was their constant Christianity. They had a truly one-of-a-kind form because it was isolated from the main churches in Europe by an Islamic barrier. So Christianity became blended with local culture to make rituals and liturgy unique to the region.